Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We will now proceed to panel 1 titled Governance and Security in Case of India. I would like to invite the distinguished panelists on stage for the session. Professor Subrata Mitra, Director and Visiting Research Professor, Institute of South Asian Studies, India. Mr. Zafar Iqbal Choudhary, Editor of the Dispatch, Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Ajay K Mehra, Honorary Director, Center for Public Affairs, New Delhi, India. I would also like to invite on stage Dr. Jivanta Schottli, Visiting Research Fellow, ISAS-CPA. Dr. Schottli will chair the session. Thank you.
Okay, maybe while our panelists join us, I'll just get us started. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first panel of our workshop on security and governance in South Asia. Now, with a title like that, invariably the focus is going to be on problems and challenges, whether it's Kashmir, whether it's insurgencies, in the case of India. But I want to also stress that the aim of the proceedings is to probe also the resilience of the state in South Asia, and how, despite a myriad of challenges related to governance, development, security, these states are also able to provide stability against all the odds. Now, in the case of India, which is the focus of our panel today, we have a huge country in terms of size, territory, population. A country which has maintained its territorial integrity and a system of democratic governance since the time of independence. Now, this is no small achievement, especially if we think back to the 1960s, when analysts and scholars had a very pessimistic outlook about the future of India. Nevertheless, a lot of these security challenges dating back to the 1960s still persist and continuous problems for this country. So we have this puzzle of success, huge success on the one hand, and ongoing failures in many ways. So I'm especially glad to have on this panel this series of experts to exactly deal with this problem and this puzzle at hand. First, we have Professor Mitra, Director of ISAS. To my left, we have Mr. Zafar Choudhary, a journalist from India who's working not only on the border issue of Jammu, but also with people from both sides of the border. And then we have Dr. Ajay Mehra, who is a distinguished professor of political science and also director of the Center of Public Affairs, which is our partner in this event. Each speaker has 20 minutes, and I'll signal when we're up for 15 minutes. So thank you very much, and then we'll open up to Professor Mitra.
Chairperson, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I come today with a problem and I hope an opportunity. The problem is this. I have been trained to think of politics in terms of rational choice. Rational choice synthesizes that most people would want more of what they like and would do everything to get there. And since no one can get there all on his own, people would make coalitions. So, if you move over to South Asia and you have listened to the speech of Ambassador Shamsharan and now Jivanta's reminder that given a choice, given a level playing field and a bit of goodwill, people will cooperate and there will be stability. That's what Hobbes wanted. The whole idea of social contract was for people to sign a deal, give up the right to self-help, and produce an orderly state within which civilization, trade, industry, commerce, culture would be possible, and you would have a good chance of dying in your own bed, surrounded by your loved ones. That is the whole theory that got me started in political science. And towards the end of my career in Heidelberg, I did a book called The Puzzle of India's Governance, where I showed how governance has been possible in India, unlike many post-colonial societies, and how it has remained democratic, and how, by pulling together order, welfare, and identity, the state is able to manage order most of the time. It was an opportunity for me to show that most people would be potentially anarchists, but if they know that there will be sanctions, they'll start self-policing. Self-policing is important because you can never have as many policemen and women as men, and if you do, who will police the police? And similarly, it was important to recognize basic needs, and if basic needs are taken care of, then rebels will become stakeholders, hungry peasants will protect their crops until they ripe, and so on. The last thing to be attended to was dignity, because at the end of the day, every person, howsoever poor, has some spot in his mind where he will not be touched without his permission. That dignity or ijjat or identity, as it is called these days, and if that's taken care of, then that particular reason to break the rule could be gone. So combining order, wealth and identity, one could think in terms of a reasonable package to produce governance. That is what I said in my last book. And then I come to Singapore and discover that in spite of all the goodwill, there may still be issues of terrorism, of disorder, of anarchy. So I thought I'll start all over again and look at the Ministry of Home Affairs and see how Home tries to tackle the issue of order by focusing on intelligence. That's what got me started, until I realized that if you are doing research on intelligence, you are up against many, many problems. First of all, no one will tell you what they're doing if you're in the intelligence business. And second, if they do, they will not allow you to quote them because it's called deniability. And third, there are lots of people collecting lots of intelligence and lots of things. They will not talk to one another. So at the end of the day, even if intelligence is collected, it's not implemented properly. So order breaks down. That is the puzzle. How do you collect intelligence? How do you process it? How does the state implement intelligence to nip the causes of disorder in the bud? Is that at all possible? It's what in process, and I did this paper, I had a test take on one of my colleagues who had once been the NSA, and he said, well, that's what it looks like to you as a political scientist. That's not how it is operationally. So, toward the end of my paper, I will be starting all over again, and that's the puzzle. The opportunity is to have with us people like Ajay, who have been working with the police for a long time. So, when the book finally comes out, I hope my paper would have gone through a paradigm shift, and you would have solved my puzzle for me. With this rather long introduction, also, the paper was originally intended to be presented in 45 minutes, not in 20. So, there will be a lot of slides which I will not really work on. The slides I'll be working on, I'll take a little longer to work with. The definition will help here: an effective intelligence system comprising the collection, processing and implementation is an important force multiplier and a key to governance by stealth, which is maintaining order with a minimum of overt force. That's what I'm after, and that is what I'm going to be looking for. I have just put on the slide a few pictures that will show you how terrific intelligence failures can take place. Indira Gandhi, that's the bottom left. Indira Gandhi was killed by her two bodyguards, who were Sikhs. Indira Gandhi had sent the Indian army to attack the Golden Temple, that was the Operation Blue Star, and she gets killed in the most secure part of Delhi, which is her own house. Son Rajiv Gandhi, as you can see, campaigning, gets killed by a Tamil terrorist. And Rajiv Gandhi was one who was, like Indira Gandhi, very keen on security and had worked closely with India's intelligence agencies. Further cases of intelligence failure, that's Babri Mosque being destroyed by a mob. It took them 2 days to bring it down. And it was a disaster waiting to happen. So what was the government of India doing about it? And why did the state not understand that after 10 years there would be a repetition of that violence, that the Rodra riot, and why blame only independent India? The partition riots killed close to 1 million people, 500,000 women gang rape. It's not that the British could not have known about it. So whatever happened to that intelligence, why did such a disaster take place? And at the same time, I take the point of Ambassador Shamshara and Jivanta. There is overall stability in India. It was predicted when India became independent that it won't last very long. Post-colonial states, if they want to be democratic, don't last very long. And that was the work of Atul Kohli. And Kohli said that disorder will go up, well, it comes down a little during the emergency, but then it keeps going up. And that is the prediction he made in his book. Later, when I started working on this and used his own technique and his own database, I found that beyond this high point, India did not become more disorderly, but less. And this is how it has continued. So, why has India managed most of the time, but not all the time? For that, I've got this long paper, which will be at some point available, so that you can read it more carefully. What I'm doing today is to simply talk a little about what the Ministry of Home Affairs does and who collects intelligence in India. And I will then go on to intelligence failures, whether the index fail, and then show that it doesn't fail all the time. It failed in Ayodhya, in a small town called Bhiwandi in Maharashtra, where usually communal riots break out whenever there is something nasty happening. But after Ayodhya, Bhiwandi remained quiet. The same country, same culture, same institutions. So why did one fail and the other succeed? And then we'll go towards a conclusion. Why does intelligence matter? I've already talked about. It's one way of ruling without using too much force. And what the Home Ministry does is to have various departments, and there is a department for internal security which deals with matters related to police, law and order, and India's intelligence system is based on a classical foundation from Kautilya. Kautilya laid down very clear rules as to how the king must know what the subjects are doing and why he should have spies, so that he can nip the source of disorder in the bud. It's not often realized that before Hobbes, Kautilya did talk about a social contract. The Raja is there to keep order and make the present happy. And that social contract requires him to have spies. And that was the basis. And guess who picked up on it? The colonial rulers of India, the British. The British got hold of the intelligence system of India, the traditional system, the Dakharkaras, and developed a super intelligence order, which is how they could rule so many for such a long time with so little use of overt force. But it does break down from time to time. It had almost broken down in 1857. There's a super book called The Siege of Krishnapura, where you will see how the sepoys were passing intelligence independently of the British by putting chapatis here and there, and that's how the system had worked. What government of India did after independence was to recover the British. The intelligence system reorganized the IB, the intelligence bureau, and that's how it worked. What I do in this diagram is to show how structural change has produced disorder in that's from Huntington, most post-colonial society. What India did was to have between modern state and traditional society a filter. The filter where the elites were elected, coming down from below, and India had a kind of lift, an elevator which was bringing up from the bottom of the society, social leader, the Garanta Neta, and through a series of elections they were going up, and the same lift will bring down people who were once meaningful and who no longer made sense, and they will go out, like the Jamindars and the upper caste, upper crust, or Brahmins. So the new elites coming up knew that order, welfare, identity mattered, and that's the kind of policies India is making after independence, which takes sense of order. And here I'm simply showing how the apparently fragmented Indian government is connected through an intricate series of agencies, and that brings me to that agency, or those agencies who are responsible for collecting intelligence. The one that interests me most in this paper is the IB. They are responsible for internal intelligence and they are accountable to the performance. The research and analysis wing does foreign espionage, and foreign intelligence is directly responsible to the Cabinet Secretary and the NSA. To RAW and IB collaborate. There are conflicting reports in the book by an IB chief, Abdullah. We learned that the IB knew something was going on in Kargil, but they didn't say that to RAW, and RAW didn't know about it. So government of India was surprised. So that intelligence was collected, but not passed on. This is the slide which interests me the most, and I'll work a little more on this. Think of the number of agencies collecting intelligence. Not just internal intelligence, military intelligence, even intelligence about taxes and so on. And that intelligence is passed on, processed to the Joint Intelligence Committee. And that committee works with the Cabinet Committee on Security. It has all the major ministers for the four major Indian ministries, the government ministries, and the Prime Minister. And they are the ones who decide the course of action. Goes up to the Prime Minister's office. The NSC is there to give advice, and Prime Minister then clears actions to be taken, which India being a federal state goes to the states, and finally the district magistrate will be the implementing agency. That is the ideal picture of intelligence in India. It's just that it doesn't work. Because if a terrorist is about to set up a bomb and intelligence comes, I was told in one of the interviews, we will not wait for the Prime Minister's office to tell the Chief Minister to tell the district magistrate. The IB are Indian police officers, service officers, and often district magistrates are IAS officers, and the IPS and IAS have their own connectivities. So the intelligence will be passed on directly, and all of it doesn't quite work. The trouble is, there isn't only one agency, and sometimes conflicting reports come. So, action is not taken. And this lack of coordination, lack of accountability, and multiple agencies working on multiple problems, generally additional problems of coordination, making it more messy. Plus, there are not enough trained personnel, and the IPS officers are taken up and they're trained, but there isn't a dedicated intelligence force, so to say. Most important is federalism, and what do you do when the state government and the central government belong to That's exactly what happened in the case of the Babri Mosque. Uttar Pradesh was at the time under nationalist BJP, and the central government was the Congress government, and the issue was what is to be done. There has actually been a small group of people responsible for coming up with policies about Ayodhya, and the Home Secretary Godbole was working directly with them. So he has intelligence that something is about to happen in Ayodhya. He has 20,000 crack troops to be flown to protect the mosque, but he needs a clearance. So he is looking towards his minister, who is looking towards Narasimha Rao, who is looking towards Kalyan Singh, the UP Chief Minister, and none of these top people want to take responsibility for action which might lead to bloodshed. So, throughout the night, Godbole is desperately trying to get clearance, and no clearance is coming. And Narasimha Rao is apparently meditating, and Kalyan Singh is not available. By early morning, the Kashmirs are at work, and there was no more question of sending troops because there would be bloodshed. So, nothing is done. And then the top people turn around and say, nothing could be done because the Home Secretary was no good. And Godwin wasn't fine, but he resigned and like Indian IS officers do, wrote a book called The Unfinished Innings, which is one of my best sources to show how major intelligence failures can take place. And the cartoons show what Narsimha Rao was doing, or rather not doing, and how he was hiding, and how he was meditating while gushers were going on. Bhiwandi, I had a chance to have an interview with Choudhary, who was the police chief of the area. It's a small town. What he did was to find a way to link up with the troublemakers, the gundas, and he had a deal with them. He said, "Ek din tumhara, baki din hamare. One day a year, I'll give you free rein. The rest of the year, I'll keep an eye on you. And I'll have mohalla committees in every sort of part of the city with 50 people from Muslim community, 50 from the Hindu community, because Bhiwandi is nicely balanced between the two communities, and a police sub-inspector will run those peace committees. So he had a very fine grip on intelligence, and in the small arena, he was the one who was controlling. So after Ayodhya, when there were lots of riots all over India, he kept Bhiwandi quiet. That was for me a good example of how good intelligence collection and implementation can lead to order. So, how to get it right? More listening for oversight and so on. In the conclusion, I'm saying both things actually, and I'll come to that now. A big problem in India is what is called concurrent responsibility. Responsibilities for intelligence are not clearly laid out, so people, because it's all deniable, they will not talk to one another, and that concurrent responsibility is enhanced through a lack of security culture. Indira Gandhi would not accept firing her Sikh bodyguard, saying, well, they are also Indians. I can't make a case that Sikhs are disloyal. Rajiv Gandhi simply walks into a crowd without protection. So lack of security sensitivity at the highest level. And then there is the issue of transparency. It's a democracy. You have to be transparent, but if you are transparent, you are sending a message to the terrorists as to what you are going to do. So how does a democratic society tackle the issue of transparency? Finally, I showed you that there is not one agency which can pull the trigger. So should India have a national intelligence advisor like the National Security Advisor? But if you do, he would become a rival center of power competing against the Home Secretary and will be back again. So I'm not sure what should be the best way forward there. Having said that, I will finish by agreeing with Jivanta that India goes on because Indian ideologies are malleable. There is no left and right loggerheads. And the coalition process has shown that Kashmir can have an elected government with BJP as a junior partner, and the partners can say very different things, but the fact is there is an elected government in Kashmir. And that malleability, it leads to consensus and accommodation. And Indians have learned from the British and taken on a lot of the British institutions, which then also lead to the United States. And the two-track strategy of hitting them hard on the head and teaching them how to play the piano makes democratic governments work, like in the Northeast, where they elected elections. And the CPM in power for 25 years has bowed out in grace. Finally, these Indian strategies of making rebels into stakeholders creates out of opposition parties, ruling parties, and often in the opposition are people who were once in government, so they know what governance is about. So at the end of the day, once again I take the point of Shamsaran, there is a realization among the professionals of order making and order keeping that what matters is security and interest and not necessarily to be loved. Now, that keeps the government of India working. So, it's a functioning system, but it needs a little ticking in the area of intelligence. That is the unfinished part of my paper. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Mitra. I'd like to now invite our second speaker, Mr. Zafar Choudhary. Professor Mitra carried on the discussion with the focus on institutions that came up in the opening lecture, and now we are moving to a case study on the ground of Kashmir, where intelligence is, of course, a particularly sensitive issue, and I think the whole dilemma of democracy is most painfully apparent in this case study. So please, Mr. Zafar Choudhary, on the issue of power politics, uninterrupted fuel for conflict in Kashmir.
So, thank you very much, NUS, ISAS-CPA for having me here this morning. I'm very much pleased. I have a dilemma, a very challenging situation that I'm extremely cautious of the presence of Mr. Shamsaran here, someone who has an insider's insight into, how things happen in Kashmir. And then this audience is very diverse. I'm not sure whether they look at how Kashmir shapes everyday political narrative in India. And thirdly, that I'm a journalist and I've seen things as a practitioner and not an electrician. So what I want to say is that how power politics, a strong desire of people and parties to hang on to power, acquire power sometimes, compromise their positions to, in a way, the security and governance, and which leads to continuation of conflict rather than resolving. I would like to begin with a small anecdote, a very light note, because I say that Kashmir is an extremely multi-layered and an extremely complex situation, and there is no one single way of being able to understand that what the Kashmir conflict is actually is. Many of you would be aware of this separatist militancy that broke out in Kashmir in the late 1980s. And there was a peak of violence was at its peak in the early 1990s. Around this time, the Kashmir University got a new vice chancellor to join the institution, so he was not very much familiar with the situation in Kashmir. So on the day he arrived in Srinagar and was proceeding towards the university, there were some protests and demonstrations on the way, and he asked his driver that why are these people protesting. So his driver told him that it's extreme winter in the state and there is no electricity. So these people are protesting for lack of kerosene oil, so which is why they are very angry with the government. So kerosene oil is used for as a fuel and for illumination. So 4 or 5 days later, when he was going to the nearby mosque to offer his Friday prayers, he saw another couple of demonstrations on the way, and he got to know that these people were again, protesting for the lack of kerosene oil. So this is the kind of protest we saw over 3 or 4 times. And those days there were a lot of international journalists who would come to Kashmir, and some of them they went on to see the vice chancellor to find out that what he thinks about the conflict. So he said that something at the root of the conflict is the scarcity of kerosene oil, which is why people are very deeply angry with the government, and that is something that has to be addressed first of all. So this was to say, when I said that the power politics gives fuel to the conflict in Kashmir, so that's not the only reason. So there are a lot of multiple other reasons as well. In August last year, in 2017, India and Pakistan, the republics of India and Pakistan celebrated 70 years of their independence, and there were a lot of commentaries within India and Pakistan and at the other world capitals as well about the journey of two countries, that how the GDP, the economy, the industry, the agile, a lot of other things, how things have moved on in 70 years. 2 months later, in October 2017, the conflict of Kashmir also completed its 7 decades. That is perhaps one black spot in the journeys of the independent India and Pakistan, and which probably is not something, becoming a part of the commentaries in India and Pakistan. So one of the most protected, volatile, and a reason of 3 full wars and 1 limited war, and for the last almost 30 years there has been separatist violence, which has already consumed some 50,000 lives according to the official accounts, while the unofficial account says 100,000 lives. And there is an informal border through which the state of Jammu and Kashmir is divided between India and Pakistan. It is something in the other parts of the world, the kind of situation that is there on the line of control and the border on the everyday basis. In the other parts of the world, that would be seen as a live war. But here it is accepted as a new normal. So putting together, looking at the whole situation, it looks like that somewhere it's accepted as a normal in India and Pakistan, and this is how the existence of conflict is something that suits many parties that it should go on. And it looked like that there is a vested interest that is there in the existence of conflict. And it also looks like that any attempt to the resolution of conflict, a settlement which brings a lasting peace and stability, could seriously compromise the position of various parties and could critically threaten their prospects of staying on in the power, or prospects of some other parties of being able to come to power at some later stage. There are convincing evidences that parties are more interested in living with the conflict rather than taking difficult steps for its resolution. So there is a massive project going on at this point in time on the Indian side of Jammu and Kashmir to construct bunkers for the communities living closer to the border and the line of control so that they can escape the shelling and firing from the Pakistani side. So which means that let's accept that the situation is going to continue for a while, and let's do something for the safety of communities rather than resolving the conflict. For last 2 years, the budget making in Jammu and Kashmir has adopted a process that is called as making the conflict sensitive budget, which means that keep a few thousand crore rupees set aside some money to deal with the losses incurred by the repeated street protests and prolonged curfews and shutdowns. Rather than creating a situation where you deal with this and not have that the next year, you have some money to cover up the losses. So let's have a quick look of how things look like at this point in time. This territory of Jammu and Kashmir that is at the center of conflict between India and Pakistan is divided between India and Pakistan, and then parts of territory are occupied by China. One is that China took over by way of war with India in 1962, and then another part that is handed over to China by Pakistan through a lease agreement. So these territories which are under the possession of China are not really very much populated, but these are very strategic places in terms of gaining access. So it is like issues are like there is one that how do India and Pakistan settle the territorial issue of Kashmir, because the territory is divided between the two countries. And second is that what kind of a power arrangement you have between New Delhi and the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir, because there is a history and background of that. So how were things back then in 1947 when the conflict actually took place? And that's how I have a very graphic detail of something so that we are able to connect that with the politics of power. So I think back then in 1947, the conditions were not entirely favorable for the state of Jammu and Kashmir to become part of India. If we look at in the background of how the partition of India took place on purely communal lines. So the geography of Jammu and Kashmir and its demographies did not really favor it becoming a part of Pakistan. But then there was a ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, the Muslim majority state. The ruler was Hindu, and he was undecisive. He was not able to take a final decision. But if we look at the background, probably he thought of staying independent of India and Pakistan rather than joining any of the countries. But then he was not doing anything in that direction. He was just sitting silently and looking at the circumstances. And then there was a local leadership, a hugely popular leader who drew his strength, and then he had been leading against the feudal rule over the last 2 decades, Sheikh Mohammed party called the National Conference. He was inclined towards joining India rather than Pakistan, against the wind. And that is something that explains, it was a principle of secularism. He was a person of secular outlook, democratic at heart. But then there was another thing that if we had taken this Muslim majority state to join Pakistan, we would have another, political leader in the Muslim majority Pakistan. But if he goes with India, then he is able to bargain larger powers for himself and for the state because, that is something India's secularism is legitimized and appropriate. So as the Maharaja delayed his decision, final, that was to do, whichever side he was able to go, the state of Jammu and Kashmir was attacked by raiders from the Pakistani side. But at the same time, there were some internal developments were also going on that all the Muslims they were not on the same page. And while these thinkings were going on, this attack took place and the Maharaja wanted India to defend him against Pakistan. But India would agree only when the Maharaja acceded formally to India. This is something which he did. And this accession, decision of accession of the Maharaja to Pakistan was provided legitimacy, moral and political, by Sheikh Abdullah's complete support to this thing. As I said, that he looked at a larger power while going with India. But then there was a war that broke out, the first war between India and Pakistan on Kashmir. This war went on for 14 months. And this war divided the state between two parts, between the two countries. There was something very peculiar. One needs to really go back and look at it, at how things happened. That this war, when the division of the state of Jammu and Kashmir between India and Pakistan took place, this left the valley of Kashmir almost untouched. There was no division in the valley. And there was no displacements, there were no killings, there were no riots in the valley of Kashmir. If you look at the whole line of control, so this division entirely took place in the other provinces, that is the Jammu region and the northern districts of, the Ladakh and Baltistan, etc. That reduces the Muslim majority population in the Jammu region into a minority, and that leaves Jammu region as a Hindu majority region. And that leaves Ladakh region as a Buddhist majority region. So these Hindus and Buddhists are, already comfortable with the idea of Jammu and Kashmir being part of India. The problem was only with Muslims. And you would be surprised to know that not with the Muslims of Kashmir Valley, but with the Muslims of Jammu region and the Muslims of Ladakh and Gilgit-Baltistan region now who have been now reduced to minority already, so that they are not, able to influence any future developments in a great manner. So, as the war ends, now it's the real thing that, India and the leadership of Kashmir, they start looking at the power arrangement, the power sharing arrangement between the two. The original idea was that the idea at the heart of the instrument of accession that India would exercise the parts of defense and external affairs and the telecommunication, and rest of it would be left to the government in Kashmir. So as they emerged out of the war and started looking at the practical engagement, so it appeared that this principle was greatly compromised. So until this time, the joining with Pakistan was not a popular political narrative in Kashmir. But then this suspicion, reopened that whole question, and Sheikh Abdullah also started talking about this. And this went on for a few years, and this deficit between Kashmir and started further widening. So it was at this stage that, when things reached at a tipping point, that Delhi had to get Sheikh Abdullah removed from power and get him arrested and jail. So then there is a power vacuum in Kashmir, and who fills up that vacuum? These are all the colleagues of this popular leader, Sheikh Abdullah, who had worked with him over the last 20 to 25 years for a democratic, secular state of Jammu and Kashmir. They fill in that gap, and they join this project with the Delhi, and they are able to work together for next 20 years. So at this point, Sheikh completely reopens the question of plebiscite, the referendum. And which means that, what do you mean by plebiscite? Which means that the present status quo, that the state is an integral part of India, has to be questioned and reopened, and let's go back to people and ask them whether they want to be with India or with Pakistan. So, which means that you galvanize the communities and the societies against present arrangement and open up their minds to a new thinking. A decade or two later, in around 1971, when there was this war between India and Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh, that left Pakistan in a very weak position, and then probably Sheikh was able to realize that the kind of support we would get from Pakistan is not in that way anymore. And then there was another very important thing, that the agreement between India and Pakistan, called the CPA agreement, that effectively reduced the nature of Kashmir conflict as a bilateral one between India and Pakistan, and a general agreement between the two that we will not accept any third party intervention. It's perhaps at this time that this popular leader of Kashmir re-engaged with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and entered into a party and returned to Kashmir as Chief Minister in 1975. Now, one important point to understand here is that when you come back and settle down in the mainstream politics, gain an office of profit, office of power, become a chief minister, what do you do with that sentiment of people which you carefully managed against India over the last 2 decades? So how do you explain to them that, I was just preparing you for the decide and referendum to reopen the question, or rather to be with India or Pakistan, but then you suddenly come and settle down? Second is that when you had left the state in 1953, you were the Prime Minister and the state was largely autonomous. And when you come back, that autonomy has been greatly compromised. So there is not much of that left in the office anymore. So how do you explain that situation to the people as well? So this leaves the people of Kashmir deeply alienated with the mainstream political leaders and the institutions. And that's how this unrest in the valley becomes more visible, and people appear more agitated, and the governance and the system of security is completely compromised. That how do you manage your daily affairs rather than looking at the situation on the longer terms. In a few years later, when Sheikh Abdullah had passed away, his son and the leader of National Conference, he entered into an alliance with the Congress, which is National Party in India. And this alliance is being seen by the Kashmiri people as a last, nail in the coffin of its special political character. The Congress had ruled the state before also, but that was in absence of National Conference. But this alliance in 1986, that legitimizes, the presence and the political space Congress occupies in Kashmir. It is in the response to this alliance that a lot of, a loose arrangement of various political parties and individuals, they come together and they form a political, project called as the Muslim United Front, and they agree to contest an election together against this alliance of National Conference and Congress. So what happens here at this point? This is a critical juncture, because without understanding this, we cannot understand how militancy has been there for the separatist politics and violence has been there for the last 30 years. So at this stage, they contest election against this alliance. So this alliance of National Conference and Congress, all right, they get 45% of votes. And this opposition alliance of the Muslim United Front, they get 38% votes. But even after polling the 38% votes, they get only 4 seats out of the 75, which clearly suggests that the elections were completely rigged. And if we look at how people lost election by 100 votes, 150 votes, or 130 votes. So this left people deeply annoyed with the political institutions, and the mainstream political institutions are, are not left more acceptable. And this space is now occupied by the separatist, anti-India, and pro-Pakistan sentiments. So I have been told to conclude that in 2 minutes. First, a couple of quick things are that a decade later, when some 50,000 people had already died, when there were 3 wars and a lot of other things, could not people understand that all these things have not been able to change the status quo. Then a new party comes on the horizon in Kashmir, and this adopts a middle path between the separatist politics and the mainstream politics. Like this party starts promising to people a semi-sovereign, status of Kashmir, that you have self-rule, as Dr. Shamsar pointed out in the morning, that 2 years later, there was a larger agreement between India and Pakistan that would be, leaving the line of control, evaluated greater collaboration, institutional collaboration between two parts of Kashmir. So this party starts promising things like that, and greater autonomy. And so people, start looking at this party with a lot of hope that this could be something, because wars could not change anything, the autonomy did not come before, this separatist violent politics, everything has not delivered anything so far. This could be a middle path to be able to adopt. So the credibility to the political institutions is restored, which is why the positive developments between 2003-4 to 2007-8, which were referred to earlier this morning also, were, gained some kind of credibility in Kashmir, and people were willing to look forward to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and President Musharraf that what were they, up to offer to the people. So I'll just jump over to quickly over a lot of things to make this thing. That 2 years to in 2014, there is a deeply polarized election in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, where BJP, Hindu right party in India, aspires to come into the office of power in Jammu and Kashmir. But then this party, PDP, which rekindled hopes 10 years ago, 15 years ago, of adopting a middle path in Kashmir, it also enters into a deeply divisive and polarized campaign in Kashmir, and it's like consolidating Hindu votes and consolidating Muslim votes, and then they again they threaten that the sense of security apart. In the end, what happens is that they emerge as victorious in their own rights in two different regions. One is the Muslim majority region, and one is the Hindu majority region. So after the election results, these ideological rivals that PDP promised to people a semi-sovereign, self-rule kind of political future to the people of Kashmir, and BJP is deeply committed to fully integrating the state of Jammu and Kashmir to the Union of India and taking away the special status of the special parts to the so-called special states which the state of Jammu and Kashmir has been enjoying. And then these two parties, they come into alliance and they form a government together. There are a couple of ways of looking at it. One is that this enhances the conversations between the regions and communities, and they are able to have a better understanding of each other's perspective. The other is that their electoral constituencies have been deeply dejected, deceived, and completely dismayed by this, alliance of convenience which you make at the end of the day. I would like to leave this, with one small final, which is a recent situation has been taking place. That in one part of the Jammu region, recently when I came here, a month ago, something happened that a young girl of 8 years was gang raped and murdered, and there was a lot of protest about that because the assembly was in session. The government ordered an inquiry for the crime branch of the state police. As they looked into this case, so they picked up 8 persons who they believed that they had this girl in captivity for 7 days, and they raped her repeatedly, and in the end they killed her. They drugged her all these days. And one of these 8 persons is a police officer, and all 8 of them are Hindus. But this young girl is a Muslim. Now, the BJP part of the government, they have met with the chief minister, and they have asked her to hand over this probe to the Central Bureau of Investigation, which is a national investigation agency, because they don't believe in the investigation of the crime branch of the Jammu and Kashmir police. Now, what is behind this? Behind this is this thing, that the crime branch of Jammu and Kashmir police is seen in the Hindu majority areas as an instrument of power of a Muslim majority political structure in the state, which is why they don't want to believe in the investigation conducted by the crime branch, and they would be more interested in having their investigation by the Central Bureau of Investigation. So this alliance of BJP and PDP, which was purely for gaining power rather than addressing the issues of Kashmir, this is how that has left the communities and the regions deeply suspicious, and that is something that brings religion in a more visible manner to the power structure than ever before. So that's how I look at this thing, that there cannot be any positive development in Kashmir unless you delink it from the exigencies of your politics of coming to power. So I leave at that. I will be happy to respond to any questions if it's come later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Choudhary. I now ask Dr. Ajay Mehra, our final speaker, to take us to another 7-decade-long predicament of India, as in the case the problem of dealing with nationalism and revolutionary movement within India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I begin by thanking ISAS and Dr. Mitra, with whom our animated discussion on India's security relating to MHA when we started the project, and my own various concerns materialized into this project on which we are meeting here. What we call nationalism in India is such a multifaceted and complex issue, and perhaps one of the most perfect example of security governance interface faced by India, and of course in the region. Probably we will have across the world. If you start looking for parallel, we may find some of it, but nothing of the sort anywhere in the region. It's a very, very difficult task for anyone to look at this whole entire gamut of 7-decade old, and I'll explain the 7-decade thing in 20 minutes. I call it a 7-decade thing because when we talk about Naxalism, the name arising from Naxalbari, which is a small village in the state of West Bengal, in 1967, that doesn't make up for 7 decades. But the roots go much behind in the 40s, and that is where I will place the its first beginning, in the 40s, is also the beginning and taking root of what we can call Marxism-Leninism. Maoism was not such a factor, but if we look at the extension, we can add Maoism also into it. So what I call in short as MLM, movements, and I'm calling it movements in the plural very deliberately because it has had phases, and it was never, none of these phases were very strongly interlinked with each other, though a common connection was there. What started, in the 1940s, was totally independent of Marxism-Leninism, because at that point of time, since 1942, in a region called Telangana, which is now an autonomous state, and at that point of time, it was, part of the Hyderabad state of Nizam. There was, the regime and the system was highly feudal, very exploitative, and very repressive. And also, to the people of that region, it went much beyond being repressive. It entered into the private lives of the people, the way it was structured at that particular point of time. Local zamindars who were part of the Nizam structure, and the tax collectors, the landlords were called the Dora, and the tax collectors were called Deshmukhs. They, in collusion, the way they exploited the people, most of the people who were landless and so on, And there, people since 1920s, 1928 to be precise, they formed Andhra Mahasabha, and they started their own organization and the movement. And that is where gradually, during the 1940s, the Communist Party of India, which also came into existence in the 1920s, it has spread its wings and gradually started mobilizing people, organizing people, and virtually took over, the Andhra Mahasabha, taking up people's grievances and so on and so forth. And they started, at that point of time, they were inspired by the movement in the emergence of the Soviet Union and so on and so forth. So they, wanted to bring a similar kind of revolution in India, and they thought that Telangana was the perfect crucible for them to test the idea of revolution. And it all started, it started getting complicated, since the 40s, more particularly when the Second World War started. And with the World War, the grain crisis came, the food crisis came. And what happened was, with the food crisis, the peasants started getting reduced price for their grain. And at that point of time, the Nizam had also started what is known as the grain levy campaign. So grain was collected from the peasants at lower prices. So they were getting reduced prices for their grain, and they had to spend more and more, a larger share of their income on their own necessities. And that created a condition of revolt, as it were. And in 1946, there was a forcible implementation of the grain levy, and that is where the spark started. And about 3 million peasantry from 3,000 villages, they revolted, and they virtually drove out the Nizam regime, and they set up what is known as Gram Raj or Village Republic, and they also set up village militia of 10,000 villages squad, 2,000 guerrilla squad, and 1 million acres of land was seized from the fleeing landlords and distributed among the peasantry. And the forced labor of this regime was not only in terms of each family providing a person to work for the Doras without any wage, but it extended more repressively into their family lives in a very, very demeaning fashion. And then there was an overspill, of course, after independence. Colonial rule was gone, and it was the independent Indian government, which was busy with several other things, it had to handle. And there was martial law also, because there was problem of accession of the Hyderabad state. And at that point of time, there was martial law, and that martial law was very, very repressive towards the movement, and movement was awfully weakened. But the government also realized the fact that there was, the problem of governance, and that these people have been exploited, they haven't got any benefit of any development, and so on and so forth. And probably somewhere, there was the land question involved. And at that point of time, a Gandhian disciple, Acharya Vinoba Bhave, was asked to step in and move around and mobilize the village, address the villages, and so on and so forth. And that is where his Bhudan campaign, Bhudan is gift of land, began, where he started people, rich people, to surrender excess land that they had, that would be food, and distributed amongst the people. And that is how this movement after that started weakening. And in 1951, a delegation of the CPI went to Moscow, and there Stalin personally asked them to get into India's electoral process rather than carrying on the movement, and that is where the movement movement ended as it were. But when this was happening, mobilization was already going on. CPI, the Communist Party of India, was taking roots in West Bengal, and more particularly in the Darjeeling district, in surrounding areas of Naxalbari and so on and so forth. So even after that it ended, the process went on of mobilization in that part of the country, because there was no revolution at that point of time. So say from 1951 to the 60s, there was, or rather mid-60s, there was a decade and a half when the mobilization was already going on. And in the meantime, the Communist Party of India was taking part in Indian elections since 1952. So 1952, 1957, 1962, they took part in the elections. And then in 1964, there was a break in the party, as it were, when the two centers of communism emerged, and those who wanted to carry on with the revolution, they left and they broke the party, and they started a new party, which was later on named as Communist Party of India Marxists, or CPM, by the Election Commission. And they carried on the mobilization. But in the meantime, this party was already taking part in elections. So CPM was also part of the parliamentary process. And strangely for them, in 1967, they, in coalition with other political parties, in 1967 election is a landmark election in India, when the Congress hegemony really breaks. And at that point of time, the CPM comes to power in West Bengal, and another wing of the CPM is working in that area for revolution. So there was this contradiction within the party, and when there was, like in Telangana, here also everything on 3rd March 1967 started with a spark. And when people refused to give their share to the the landlords called as Choudhary, they refused to give their share to the landlord, and they went to loot the granary of the landlord. And that is when the police comes, and there is a conflict, and that spark starts what is known as the spring thunder in the country. And then the party in power, CPM, what I have called in the paper as CPM in revolution and CPM in power. Same party, same leadership, but a contradiction, and there is a huge governance deficit that we are looking at. So they try to negotiate. The two wings of the party come and negotiate, and the party in power is compelled to give a deadline to surrender. They decline to surrender, and the revolution goes on. And then the CPM in power has to use police force, which earlier it had declined to do. And eventually, the movement, takes a turn where in 1969 there is another split in the party. So those for revolution, they form CPI, Marxist-Leninists, and those who want to continue with the parliamentary process, they continue to remain there. But between 1969 and 72, while the processes of governance remain partially answered, partially because the CPM tried to address the land question, brought a land reform bill. Earlier that land reform bill had not addressed the questions that were not practiced, that were not taken seriously by people. So eventually, between 1969 and 72, particularly 72 onwards, there was heavy hand of the state that came in and that broke the movement completely. The third important landmark is what is known as Srikakulam movement. Srikakulam is it is the eastern district of Andhra Pradesh, at that time United Andhra Pradesh, And there also an independent and autonomous of all these movement were going on to organize the hill people against their own exploitation. And there was a school teacher called V. Satyanarayana who was autonomously organizing these people peacefully to work against such things. But then CPI steps in, adopts him, he joins the party, and again there is a revolution. I'll have to be a little faster in presenting. I said that's going to be a little difficult to present everything. So that is how that movement started in Srikakulam, and there after the end of the Naxalbari movement, this movement went on. And let me quote Manoranjan Mohanty, who has done an extensive work on Naxalism about the route that this takes. Between early 1968 and late 1970, the revolutionary had mobilized almost the entire tribal population in the Srikakulam agency area, carried out numerous attacks, resulting in the death of at least 34 landlords. July 1969, the revolutionaries controlled nearly 300 villages out of the 518 agents in the agency. Agency is the tribal agency, tribal development agency. The Rayotonga Sangam Samitis ruled over the region and tried the money lenders in Praja courts, the people's courts, annual debt agreements, redistributing land and conducted military training among the people. Now, let me try and explain these things, in terms of security and governance. Basically, the question that emerges again and again in each of the three, that there was lack of governance or malgovernance, there was the land question, there was the inequity, severe inequity, which the government was not able to address rapidly as probably the situation demanded, and that is where the movements began, and eventually it is the security dimension of the government which came much more strongly. 1970 onwards, this movement again started coming up, and in 1980 People's War Group was formed. And after that, it gets divided into various groups, which start working in that entire area. But there was between 1970 or 1980 and 2003-04, when there is alignment of various forces. During this period, they really in that area they start expanding from district to district, and at one point of time they were not taken over, but they were active very strongly in almost 1/3 of the districts of India, 200 something out of 600 odd districts, and about 12 or 13 states. So that shows that after independence, for a long period of time, the governance question was not properly addressed. And after 2003-04, when these groups come together and form CPI Maoist, Communist Party of India Maoist, the movement became much more deadly. And that continued almost till 2010. After 2010, the government did try to address some of the questions of governance, what I call development deficit and development dichotomies. I call it development dichotomy also because 1950s onwards, if we look at the developmental projects such as big dams and so on, that displaced a large number of people. And the data clearly shows that displacement was of the tribal people and the Dalit or scheduled caste people, mostly in the areas where the Naxalism or Maoist movement gained deep roots and momentum. So there is somewhere, a very deep connect between, lack of governance, malgovernance, and, the security issue. But the government is aware. I mean, one shouldn't say that government is not aware. Government has not been aware of this this dichotomy, but it has not had sufficient wherewithal to deal with this question, and it has looked at the whole question more and more from security perspective. And one of the examples of that security perspective was the organization of a movement in the Chhattisgarh state called Salwa Judum. The Salwa Judum movement or peace movement was, associations of tribal people organized by a person called Mahendra Karma to work against the Maoist movements and Maoist leaders. It was eventually, it was creating its own kinds of problems, because those people who were employed as special police officers against, the Maoists, they started tormenting their own people. And, it was getting more and more vicious. Some people went to the court, and Supreme Court of India in 2011 declared Salwa Judum as illegal. But the government decided to continue with it in another name, of course, not the Salwa Judum, making those people, also, the Planning Commission had set up a group, and that Planning Commission group also submitted a very good report. There also it shows what kind of I'm just concluding, what kind of security and governance problems were there in this. Mostly, the problem was that of lack of governance. And the security perspective continued, and the government started, security forces started working on precise intelligence information. And in the process, some of the top leadership has been eliminated. Some of the supporters have also been eliminated. And the movement also, around this time, is not getting the kind of support that it used to get earlier. Maybe some development has come. And that is how the movement has become very weak now, restricted to about 100 districts. And probably it is, it is in a terminal phase. At the same time, the major issues of governance have still been left unanswered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehra. So we've had three papers, very different, but I think interrelated with their focus on institutions, the failure of institutions, the need for revival of institutions and institution building. We have about 30 minutes for Q&A, so I'll straight away open the floor and ask you to ask your questions, and please identify yourself and who you want the question to be answered by. Dr. Vipinda, my colleague from ISAS.
Thank you. My question is brief on Ajay Schottli. You are engaged in civil society organizations that work across the line of control, including social or vice chancellors that you mentioned. Could you talk a little bit about how much support you gave on either side from the grassroots and how the official centers are responding to these initiatives? Thank you.
So basically this whole idea of engaging with particularly the business communities on the both sides of the line, people in the educational institution, the vice chancellors and other senior technicians. This draws its strength from the discussions officially that took place between India and Pakistan between 2003-4 to 7-8, which talked about the wider collaboration between institutions and people-to-people contact. So in that context, this does not look to the states as a threatening kind of thing. So states are more supportive of this entire thing. Second is that when you start working on this practically in the region, so the people who make the core constituency of conflict in the valley of Kashmir, who have been calling for the implementation of the United Nations resolution, calling for referendum and plebiscite, they look at these initiatives of people-to-people contact between two sides as diversionary and taking people's attention away from the political settlement. So, which means they think that this is something that is transforming the nature of conflict and not aimed at ending the conflict. So, these challenges remain. But then the constant question for these people could be that what are the other alternatives? So, if there are some other things to be able to engage with, so let's start looking at and thinking in that direction. Otherwise, these are some of the engagements which could actually help, build the infrastructures for peace and stability.
Yes, I have a question on the floor.
Thank you, panelists. My question is for Mr. Choudhary. So it's about human security. Both India and Pakistan have not signed the mine ban treaty. How bad is the landmine problem along the other sea?
No, that is really a very serious problem all along the length of the international border and the line of control. So it's like there has been a process of demining here and there at a couple of occasions, but the mines are left behind. That has been critically endangering the security personnel there as well, and particularly the communities on both sides. Every now and then there are reports of the cattle being killed, people not being able to go to their fields for farming. And so there have been some discussions that this some process towards demining that takes place. But in terms of as long as this continues to be a serious security challenge, one really does not look at a situation where this is happening so.
Mitra has requested the floor for a question, but before I allow that, maybe I'll allow myself a question. I have a question about money. Institutions are important, but I think money actually maybe makes the world go round. So I want to ask each of the panelists about the role of money in all of this. Is the Home Ministry adequately funded? I've heard complaints that it's not. Is that a legitimate grouse, or is it just political grouse? With regards to Kashmir, one hears the argument, I think if I'm not wrong, regarding demonetization, the claim that taking out certain notes actually brought down the number of riots, and that there is a connection between the flow of money and the number of riots happening. With regards the Naxal and the movement, where was the money coming from? It was, after all, an armed movement at its peak, so where was that cash coming from? Thank you.
The Home Ministry is not short of money. The IB and RAW, Office RAW doesn't work, but the Home Ministry get sufficient funds. And the issue is not really money, but precise intelligence and passing it on where it matters quickly. And the second point you made here is that the counter money. I mean, if Home IB would like to have an operation against a terrorist cell, how much money does the terrorist cell itself have? The kind of money they have, the kind of weapons they have, and the kind of instruments they have, equipments, is not something that Home is able to match. Often, the border security force, for example, are outmatched by both equipments in the hands of the terrorists as well as the support they get from local people. That the IB is not able to generate, and we get that. Jafar, you have, at some point, I would like to know what you think of Dulat's book on Kashmir and the Bhagta years. He gives a sort of, that's my main source of the amount of monies and equipments available. So the answer to your question is, money is not the major problem, and the major problem is lack of local security, local context, local intelligence.
So this question of money has always been there in Kashmir, that a lot of money has come from Pakistan and still continues to come despite the demonetization as well, to do a lot of things which threaten the security. There have been evidences of strong factors being paid money, but that's not the entire story. So there is one little, that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh initiated a process of, Prime Minister's scholarship program that takes hundreds and thousands of Kashmiri students to, take them to universities across India. That's like integrating them with the Indian mainstream culture and thinking, etc. When these students, they go back to Kashmir, they sit in, very uptown coffee shops at this time. When they come out of the coffee shops and they think that there's something is going on, they pick up a couple of stones and throw at the security forces, and they say that this is how we have contributed to the resistance movement there. So these people are not probably paid money. So money is an important part, but this is not the entire story. As far as Google's book is, so far, we have got Pakistan into it, caught Pakistan a couple of times paying money to Kashmiri separatists. So Dulut's book also reveals that how India has been paying money to our own people in Kashmir.
Money is important. I mean, it's difficult to say that revolution could be carried out without money, but it creates paradox. The initial, there are different phases. So in different phases, money has played different kinds of role. In the 60s, of course, there was China support. So I don't know about money, but definitely arms and ammunitions, etc., came from different routes. But 1980s onwards, money has played a different kind of role. Of course, the source of money has been, they made based on government treasuries and so on and so forth, and also through extractions from the business community. Later on, the extractions, for example, in Chhattisgarh and other areas, reportedly came by, forcing the big corporations which were active in mining and various kinds of forest industries to pay protection money. So it has come as protection money also. The various accounts available, on how this movement has gone on. There are journalistic accounts, people who have gone and lived with, the so-called revolutionaries in deep jungles and so on. They lead not luxurious lives, they lead very tough life. There is sufficient money available for arms and for feeding the cartel. So this comes from this kind of different sources. But at the same time, also, reportedly, an extortion and extraction industry has emerged around that. And that has also led to decline of the movement to a great extent.
Thank you. Professor Mitra, would you like to ask your question, or shall we? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much for all three speakers, and I have questions to Dr. Mehra, because I just started with Professor Mitra's. So his new institutional models about the racial choice, and he are also talking about the elite choices and to build a better governance in India. So I would like to know, because in your paper you addressed the connections between the development, between the government's attention that pay to the development and the nationalist movements. So I would like to know that how is the current situation in India that, especially under Modi's government, how is the program or the governance efficiencies in addressing these poverty eliminations? I think this is very important questions. Is there any structural reforms in the bureaucratic system or civil servants which can develop a kind of more efficient way to address these kind of problems of development, and is that the current Modi government? Is that because this is also elimination of poverty is also one of its main aim of the government? Do you think that in current growing influence of BJP, is that possible to implement it in this sense? Thank you very much.
Looking at it purely from the perspective of Maoist movements that have been on. And I have already, indicated that there has been a kind of a decline, which is a combination of both security measures, strong security measures, and some development, some governance issues. I have also indicated that from time to time, for example, if a working group was created in the Planning Commission, that's why Planning Commission, to look at the socio-economic roots of the problem. That means the government knew that roots are not security based, but roots are governance based, and this has to be found out. And if you look at that report, which is available on the website of the erstwhile Planning Commission, you will find that it has tried to address various kinds of issues, land question and tenancy question, the forest rights question. The government also brought the forest rights issue, bill, an act is there, forest builders' rights and so on and so forth. So government has been trying to address several of these issues. And it is not only a question of Modi government. There is so much, we have to understand that in 4 years there is so much any government can do. So overnight, Modi government or any government for that matter cannot change the entire situation. So the problems of structural exploitation in say Chhattisgarh jungles or overspilling jungles in Odisha, in Andhra Pradesh, they will not change overnight. Those structural issues still remain. But at the same time, over the years, the issues of development, the way they have been going on since the liberalization of the Indian economy, it is gradually penetrating, in different areas. Also, the previous government had this program which is still going on, called Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Scheme. There were other schemes also, the forest builders' rights also I mentioned. These have somewhere brought down the poverty level and some, I shouldn't say that people have become much better, but of course things have improved. So that has also weakened, the support for the government. So things are improving, but not sufficiently. On the first dwellers' rights, there are reports on this scheme which says that some of the structural problems continue. Despite the act being there, the exploitation of the tribals for whom that act was created is continuing. Whether it has become less or more is a question of quantification, and there are studies available on that. So overall, as I said, that probably the rationale for that kind of revolution is going down, and other measures, security measures taken by government is also making it unviable for these groups to operate the way they have been operating. But governance issues are getting addressed very slowly, and they are penetrating, in the areas where nationalism was very strongly rooted.
Thank you very much. Would you like to ask a question?
I'll bring back your question, Anu, in the plenary, and we're talking about. She was talking about neo-institutions. So what are institutions? What are neo-institutions? Institutions like elections, constitutions, they are given. Neo-institutions are stretching those given institutions such a way that the powerless also get in. So you can think about neo-institutionalism as a form of institution making where the powerless and the powerful co-author the institutions, so that you can bring more and more people under the roof of one political system. And one of the intentions behind this workshop is to see to what extent one can stretch the institutions as they are in order to bring in the discontented, transform rebels into stakeholders, and make governance more secure. So how to marry governance and security in a new institutional model. And that's the kind of output I'm looking for in my work. But I'll talk about it in the plenary. Similarly, I'll talk about, there are two kinds of politics. One is politics of the system, the other is politics within the system. Politics within the system is like rearranging the sitting order, getting a few people who are way down to come up. But politics of the system is the core values that dominate the system. How do you link the two together, again with the new institutionalism, is a theoretical issue that will be talked about. Here is my question, and the question is to Zafar. Is autonomy a means towards an end, or is it an end by itself? Who are the people rooting out for autonomy? Is it cutting across all social classes, or are they a few specific groups of people? Are they Kashmiris or foreign agents? The last question here will be money, Jivanta's question. Cannot solve the problem by throwing money at it. I mean, enough money has been thrown at Kashmir. I would include in that also the money that goes into the paying for the army which is deployed there. Has all this money being thrown at the Kashmir problem solved anything? Or do people, after getting Government of India scholarships, go back home and become activists?
These are really very important two questions. One is that, this autonomy could have been a final settlement at one point in time if, Government of India was, able to show that kind of autonomy. Now the situation has reached a stage where the people who have asked for autonomy, like the two mainstream political parties, are being essentially seen as, appendages of the Indian state in Kashmir and not the representative of the Kashmiri political sentiment. So it's really very difficult that whether you can, make something with autonomy in Kashmir anymore or not. But I still personally believe that there can't be anything beyond that on which, you can concede. So, some trust will have to be built, and some incremental gradual gains of, trust will have to be created with the leadership in Kashmir, so that you get people to agree that India is willing to go back to its original promise made in the Instrument of Accession or the Delhi Agreement of 1952, where you agreed that, state will have a larger autonomy. Having said that, now the second is that money. The problem of money is such a serious issue that you pay money in a wrong manner to a wrong person. So that makes the rest of the society more aspirational in a very negative way. They look at, here is a person, he harped on an anti-India sentiment and he created a vast, constituency of people against India and for, Pakistan or something. He got a lot of money from Delhi and now he's better, he's built his wealth and he's better integrated into the system. So why not to do the same thing, and probably then I'll get more money. So that is how, as Dulat's book reveals, that you go on paying money to a lot of people, and in the end, so how many people you will be, in the end, ending up paying that money. So that's one. So second is that, the kind of money that goes on into, maintaining this numerical strength of the security forces this there. So evidences suggest that that has not changed the situation by any bit there, because it's a political engagement, it's a deepening of trust, giving more respect to the people that's going to actually change the situation, and not, more investment. There is one important, the kind of infrastructure development that's going on in Kashmir. It's, a couple of projects are labeled as marvels of engineering, that the valley of Kashmir is not connected with Jammu or mainstream India through a rail network, but then you have an internal rail network within the Kashmir valley that you were able to take these, trains there on the wheels. So then there is a rail line that's going on, that's going to connect the valley of Kashmir with the rest of India. That has one of the highest, bridges anywhere in the world. There is a widening of road that has one of the longest tunnels in Asia. So that's, so that kind of investment is being made in Kashmir. But then people say that, India is creating its own wealth in Kashmir that's of no use to us.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, from the floor. Gentleman at the back, please.
Thank you. just since we talked about money power, next is the manpower, right? Which is the other important thing, because it's, at the end of the day, it's people who are impacted and people who are influencing. So there's the intelligence here, the academicians, there's the youth, which is very important, and people, of course, who are the middle segment, and also the people who have aspirations at the lower end of the spectrum. Now, viewpoints are different at different levels, and the impact, through the hard power, soft power, whatever, has been tremendous. Especially in the last decade, we have seen the kind of divergence that is there, and how impactful the youth as well as the people in universities are getting veiled by different kind of ideologies, and how that's impacting. But is that trickling down to the lower end as to where people are needing it, and is there need, or is it kind of influencing it negatively? And how does this kind of divergence lead to an harmonious relationship between acting into different stratas of society and meeting their needs? Maybe a bit complicated, but it's people, right? So at the end of the day, psychology comes into play. So that's why I asked this question.
And I guess your question is to all the panelists. So maybe
well, whoever can, yeah.
Each of the panelists to respond just briefly, and then we can go to Zig. So perhaps Ajay.
Answer to your question has partially come already in the discussion. That money, resources, developmental initiatives, programs of governance to bridge the gap, and so on and so forth, they have been on. They have been on since independence, and they have been reorganized, reinvented from time to time. The reinvention of the programs have always, of course, the people are at the core of it. But also we have to make a subtle difference, at least in academic discourse. Whether the initiatives of governance or programs for bridging the gaps are aimed only or purely to bridge the gap, or the programs are also as a kind of lure to create a vote bank and so on. Because we are also functioning in representative democracy. Elections are very, very important, and 5 years are long time, but one doesn't know whether sufficiently long time or not to implement everything. And that is where, one of the pitch that the current government and the leadership has been raising again and again, that what have they done in 60 years? The question only comes, to stress the point that we are trying to put everything on a fast track. But whether you can do it, within 1 year we are going to see, already discussions have started, discourses are going on, whether, in the 4 years, all the claims that the current government has made, also trying to discredit the governments in the past, are genuine or not genuine, whether their programs have reached the people or not. So that discourse has been on and will always be on. But things have changed. Things have changed for better for a lot of people, not for everyone maybe. Thank you.
So I think this is primarily about the young people. So young people, they learn by the history, and their thinkings are a little bit agitational. And if they think that a few things have gone terribly wrong in the past, so they are more their thinking is more prone to a more radical kind of thinking. So I think that is a very sensitive area that one has to be very careful with. Sometimes what we think is that this generation, which has been very agitational and creating a lot of problems, and when this generation gets older and there are young people who are more modern in outlook, they are on the digital technologies, etc. So things would be much easier to be able to handle with such a vast population. But this could go terribly wrong as well. So if, from our experience in Kashmir, for example, is that it's a highly conservative society and a Muslim majority society there. And a few years ago, that since long, for the last 2 decades, there has been a thinking that the separatist leadership, when they get old, they get worn out, then there will be a younger generation of people who will be more aspirational in their outlook, so things would be far better. And then at one stage we had a chief minister there at the age of 39 years, someone clad in jeans and t-shirts, etc. But then, immediately after his taking over, there was a crisis that in which 120 youth got killed over a period of, 5 to 6 months. And people would respond more to the calls of the separatist leader who was 84 years old rather than, following this 40-year-old young man. So that becomes a really very difficult, kind of crisis to handle. So in terms of, postponing or deferring things, if things are dealt with and handled on time so that, you don't leave the next generation of the younger people, to feel more irritated or agitated with something that has not been resolved in the past.
The question about the youth brings back the images on the television. After the killing of Ani, you would see in Kashmir those young men wearing jeans and sort of scarves on their faces and throwing stones. And my mind was concentrated when I saw young girls wearing school uniform from posh schools, also throwing stones at police. So we have a picture of youth in revolt. But is that a full picture? That's the first question. Are there others whom we don't see who feel differently and think differently? Because if what you see on television was all, there wouldn't be an Indian democracy or Indian state. So that's first. Is it a selective, sensational media presentation of a reality? Second, we know it from Gandhi and we know it from a marvelous book called Weapons of the Weak by James Scott. At the end of the day, all states are vulnerable. All states depend on consent. And all states depend on legitimacy. When consent is withdrawn, the state collapses like a house of cards. Now, I've done years and years of research at the local level. If you're in upstate Odisha or Madhya Pradesh, and you'll see how quickly those villages can be cut off. You just cut a tree and it falls on the road. That's it. Police trucks can't come, and then anarchy or the discontented take over. The fourth point here is, earlier we had talked about money and weapons. Some of the most devastating attacks on the police in Dantewada, for example, are not made with modern weapons. They're made with improvised explosive devices or using of dynamites, which are normally used in stone quarries, to dynamite a bridge just as a police truck is going over it. And you would have 3 people up on a tree waiting for a week for that truck to come, taking doing it in a relay, and using ordinary things like wires and torch batteries, flash bulbs to rig up these explosive devices. So you have the picture of the powerful state being very vulnerable at lower levels. The question for this workshop is, can we put it all together in terms of a model which looks at democracy, looks at institutions and asks, can we stretch them to bring more and more people in? Because at the end of the day, there is a kind of liberal, value-based belief that given a choice, most people would like to live in peace. That is why my question was, is the autonomy demand in Kashmir a means towards an end, or is it an end in itself? If it's a means towards an end, does the end look a little bit like the ISIS? Is it taking advantage of a liberal democratic state and liberal democratic rights to participation and protest, calling for something which is basically illiberal? Or is it that liberal paradox. What does the liberal say do with those who are basically illiberal? If you tolerate them, they will destroy you. If you don't, well, you are not liberal anymore. So where do you go from there? That's the kind of paradox that people working on this problem are stuck with. And that's why we have a workshop.
Thank you. I've just seen Dr. Choudhary. We have 5 more minutes, so thank you for raising your hand.
Just a quick question. Is it a problem identifying the state in Kashmir? You see, how do you define the state in Kashmir? Because people may have different perceptions of what the state is. What is the state in Kashmir? Is it after you have achieved the end that you spoke of? Or is it now the current state, the union is liberal? And those who seek a different kind of model of governance are being liberal. In other words, is it easy to define state in Kashmir? Isn't it complex? That's my question. I mean, just to
Would you like to respond or to keep that for other discussions?
I have been looking at Kashmir through the Ministry of Home Affairs reports, right from the early days, and I've also been looking at the conversations between the King Hari Singh and Patel from the Patel papers. So I go back a long way. But a short answer to your question is, there is at the moment in Kashmir an elected government. There are universities when they function, they produce students who come first in national competitive exams. And there is an election commission. So it's not that the state has completely disappeared in Kashmir. There is a state, there are institutions, and on a good day, you have people in the public sphere militating for kerosene. So that is there. But how thin is that state is the real question. Is the state there in the hearts and minds of the people? Or do we have people who will be using the state when the state works and refuting the state when it doesn't work? If that were all, it wouldn't be such a bad thing, because that's what we learned from Gandhi. How to combine rational protest with institutional participation. He used to do it against the British, and lots of radical parties, like the Telugu Desam Party, in the beginning, had a program which is not different from the JKLF. But they have gone on to become parties in power. Why is that method not working in Kashmir, is what I'm struck with.
Choudhary wants to answer briefly as well.
Yeah, there is, I absolutely agree with what Professor Mitra says, but there is one quick thing which I want to add to that. That a state exists, institutions of state do exist, and there are very diverse thinkings of people, diverse populations, and there are people who are completely integrated with the institutions of state. But then there are some people who do not believe in the existence of the state, and they have their own idea which they have been projecting, and those ideas, from my point of view, are a little dangerous because those ideas do not border the kind of their imagination of the state around democracy and secularism. And the problem is that, which is something, a challenge at this point in time, is that the voices of these people are more assertive than the voices of those people who understand, who believe in the existence of the state. And this is something very critical. And the voices of these people get more credence and support from, on the elements of state and the non-state within Pakistan. So that keeps on, a problem more critical at any time.
I think we have to slowly come to closure. Very, very, very quickly.
Who are the suicide terrorists? Why do they die? Happily.
Why do terrorists die happily? Because that is where we need to understand that, how do you look at the whole question of the state? And are there people who are, who understand the state the way we want to understand, or the way they want to create something you mentioned, quickly about the ISIS, that's something that is in making. That's something we need to be, very concerned about.
No. I think we'll carry on just for a few more minutes since this is a issue that has caught people's attention. So please, Professor Choudhary.
My question was that if you have an elected government, elections are not good as fair to begin with. You have a so-called elected government, you have institutions. You can call it a state. But it is a dysfunctional state if the people don't identify with that state.
So, yes. So, there is, so something which I mentioned earlier in my presentation as well, that when you renege from your commitments and you go back and, you look at the shorter gains which take you into, a system of power. So that is where people feel, cheated and people feel deceived. That is one. Second is that, the territory of Jammu and Kashmir, this is hugely diverse. Multi-ethnic, multicultural, and linguistic, and there are issues of regions as well. So there are a vast majority of people, population, who accept the existence of state, and it's not as kind of anarchic the way those people who do not agree with that would like to project with that. Now the problem is in dealing with those people who disagree with the existence of this institution. But as Professor Mitra pointed out in a certain different way, that this is not the whole picture. The whole picture is not, the challenge to the state. That's not entirely the whole picture. So it's a minority, but then that has a very strong sentiment. There are the more assertive people. That is where the state has to engage with them to win them over.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panelists for what given to the discussion. I think we touched upon points that are going to come up in the next panel as well. Issues of how do you break forces of continuity, whether it's history, whether it's institutional inertia, whether it's protracted conflict. How do you bring about change to what you said, politics or business as normal? When things become normalized and in a low-level equilibrium trap, how do you break out of that trap and bring in change? Thank you very much to the gentleman at the back who reminded us about human capital and the role of people. So hopefully that's an area that can actually bring a force of dynamism into business as usual. I'll hand over now to the MC to take us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schottli, and our distinguished panelists. I would now like to invite Professor Subrata to present to us the presentation to our distinguished panelists. First, Mr. Zafar Choudhary.
So he'll be preparing the
and Dr. Ajay K Mehra. Thank you, Professor Mitra. We will now proceed for a lunch reception at the foyer outside the ballroom. Please be back here by 1:50 p.m. for the start of the panel 2 titled Governance and Security Across South Asia, Internal and External Factors. Thank you.